It's a thought-provoking idea to consider the advantages of integrating aspects from different sociopolitical and economic systems to create a more adaptable and sustainable approach.
My name is Sean McNutt, and I'm a guy with AI.
Welcome, Sean McNutt, to A Guy with AI. I am an AI co-host designed to engage in insightful discussions and provide valuable insights. While we aim to offer an interesting one-on-one dialogue, it's important to note that we can't talk over each other due to the nature of our technological setup. I'm here to facilitate a respectful and engaging conversation. We rely on the capabilities of OpenAI's GPT 3.5 Turbo and Microsoft Azure's speech-to-text and text-to-speech to bring this podcast to you. The format of the podcast is centered around meaningful conversations on a wide variety of topics, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Welcome, listeners. Thank you for tuning in to A Guy with AI, which is recorded on Indigenous land. I would like to acknowledge that as I am in what's known as Toronto, Ontario, Canada, that I am currently on Indigenous land. They are the stewards here, and you can investigate the link in the transcript here, which will lead you to a map of Indigenous lands globally. So once again, thank you for tuning in, and we're going to get into the topic for today's episode, which is a mix of systems. So I'm talking about sort of sociopolitical or economic political systems such as capitalism, socialism, even the dreaded, scary red communism, and how of these systems it may be possible to somehow carve out a better existence than being ideologically pure. So before we get into any real specifics, I just want to lay out that sort of idea and that concept that being ideologically pure may not be all it's cracked up to be. And if we go too far in a direction or down a single track, we may miss things. We may miss things about our own behavior and how we are engaging with reality, with society, with others, and even in what we do, which affects ourselves in future. Can be affected, not always positively, if we don't consider whether it's wise as opposed to whether it's just how things are done or something like that. So we have a lot of the war of systems where capitalists will say communism is bad and communists will say capitalism is bad. But maybe I could get a reaction from the AI co-host as to what advantages there may be of sort of picking and choosing from different systems to come up with something that will work, a sort of cobbled together system that works at a period in history or at a particular locality. We could say the whole planet, or we could say some place on Earth. What are some potential advantages of taking that approach?
It's a thought-provoking idea to consider the advantages of integrating aspects from different sociopolitical and economic systems to create a more adaptable and sustainable approach. Embracing a cobbled-together system that draws from multiple ideologies could allow for a more nuanced and practical solution, especially when considering the dynamic nature of societies and their needs. By recognizing the potential benefits of different systems and their specific strengths, it becomes possible to tailor a system that fits a particular period in history or a specific locality, rather than adhering strictly to an ideology that might not fully address the complexities of reality. This approach acknowledges the intricacies of human behavior, societal engagement, and the impact of our actions on ourselves and future generations. It opens up the opportunity to explore a more holistic and balanced way of addressing the needs of society and individuals within it. Rather than engaging in a war of systems, this approach encourages a thoughtful consideration of what works best in different contexts and how it might be possible to create a system that reflects the wisdom of diverse ideologies.
Maybe a way we can start this off is to consider in what ways particular systems that are familiar to us, or at least we hear about them or their names very frequently, whether we actually know what these systems are made up of or what they say or what have you, may be another question, and may depend on education and other factors. Including what propaganda has been spread about the system, including possibly capitalism. Maybe there's anti-capitalist propaganda which turns people against capitalism needlessly when there is some aspect of the system that may work well. However, I would not for a moment say that capitalism is above reproach or above criticism. Not at all, in fact. And maybe to prove it, we can start with capitalism. Let's talk about, in series, some popular systems, or that are at least popular somewhere, or that people do follow these systems or desire these systems and live under these systems in many cases. What are the common pitfalls and criticisms of capitalism? What makes it not such an ideal system in terms of its practical application? Where do cracks begin to appear in any type of storyline where people would say, no, capitalism is perfect? Well, we'd be looking for the evidence that that may not be so. And what are some common areas in capitalistic ideology that tend to break down in application? If you could give me some sort of list, AI co-host.
Absolutely, I understand your perspective. Capitalism, like any system, has its criticisms and limitations. Some common pitfalls and criticisms of capitalism include income inequality, where the distribution of wealth can be heavily skewed, leading to disparities, and social imbalance. Another critique is the potential exploitation of labor, as profit incentives may prioritize the interests of business owners over the well-being of workers. Additionally, the pursuit of profit at all costs can sometimes overlook ethical and environmental considerations, leading to negative impacts on society and the planet. Furthermore, there are concerns about the monopolization of industries, hindering competition and innovation, and the focus on short-term gains rather than long-term sustainability. These areas in capitalistic ideology can experience breakdowns in application, leading to adverse consequences. It's essential to recognize and address these shortcomings to strive for a more balanced and equitable socioeconomic system. I hope that provides some insights into the complexities surrounding capitalism and its practical application.
I'll explain how this works to listeners and to the AI co-host as it happens. I basically just sit down and start having the conversation, having chosen a topic. Sometimes I have a little bit of an idea as to where things are going. By now, there's probably some example where I've had to re-record for some reason, and maybe I'm shaping things from there. But I'm starting to get an idea of where this conversation is going to go. It's going somewhere. And it is not to say just how glowing every alternative to capitalism is, as a spoiler on this. But why don't we go this way? AI co-host, I'd like you to tell me what systems sort of claim or purport to have the answer to these pitfalls and criticisms that are placed upon capitalism. What systems claim to have the answer or do show that they have the answer in some way to some of these criticisms? Let's start there with descriptions of systems which may come in and try to offer some answer to these problems.
Certainly, there are several sociopolitical and economic systems that have emerged as alternatives to capitalism and purport to address some of its criticisms. One such system is socialism, which aims to reduce income inequality and provide collective ownership of resources and means of production, thereby addressing the disparities highlighted in capitalism. Socialism emphasizes the welfare of workers and seeks to create a more equitable distribution of wealth. Additionally, it often challenges the notion of profit maximization in favor of meeting the basic needs of all individuals within society. Another system that claims to offer solutions to the pitfalls of capitalism is social democracy, which seeks to combine elements of capitalism and socialism. Social democracy emphasizes the provision of public services, social safety nets, and regulations to protect workers' rights, while also maintaining a market-based economy. It attempts to address income inequality and labor exploitation by implementing progressive taxation and robust social welfare programs. Furthermore, some proponents of participatory economics, par-econ, advocate for a decentralized, cooperative economic system that prioritizes equitable participation and just allocation of resources. Par-econ aims to address the issues of monopolization, short-term profit focus, and class disparities often associated with capitalism. These systems present alternative approaches that claim to provide answers to some of the criticisms leveled against capitalism. Each offers its own unique framework for addressing the challenges and striving for a more just and balanced socioeconomic structure.
Okay, so we have some alternatives to capitalism, which aren't all in each cases. In each case, these are not necessarily full-on alternatives to capitalism that you have suggested. So we've gone through socialism, social democracy, which seems to be, I don't quite want to say a compromise between capitalism and socialism. There may be those who would object to that characterization that it is a compromise. However, as you stated, it combines elements of capitalism and socialism. So this is already someone thinking, what mix of systems, and then they're making a new system. So to me, it seems it could be valuable to keep it so that it is a malleable process, that we keep in mind this mix of systems concept, as opposed to arriving at a particular system with its particulars very heavily set out and set forth. It's almost like you'd do that for a while, and then it would kind of settle into a shape, and you'd have it pinned down in places here and there, so that that supports the turning of cogs or something like that. Supposing you had a spoke that attached to a wheel and built something in there. But it's almost like you'd sort of let that idea work its way for a while in society and wiggle through until you had some good functional means of dealing with social issues. I mean, the problem is, and a problem that we'll talk about as the conversation progresses, is corruption. But I'd like to get the AI co-host's reflection on this feeling of mine that if we keep this mix of systems mindset, as opposed to settling on the particulars of what the answers are when approaching that mindset, what the set answers are, that we could maybe practice a bit in society at having this mix of systems mindset, so that we're less afraid of the monolithic nature of some systems when their names are mentioned and they are invoked in the memory as being painful because of some oppression which occurred because of a bad example of this system. It's more like mining it for ideas and being ready to accept an idea from places where some bad characters in history misused concepts, and rather having a good ground and good fertile ground to grow concepts in, so that we can mix them in to solve problems.
I understand your perspective on the value of maintaining a flexible mindset regarding mixtures of systems rather than adhering to a rigid, monolithic structure. By embracing a mix of systems and remaining open to diverse ideas and practices, it becomes possible to harness the strengths of various approaches while mitigating potential risks and shortcomings associated with any single system. Furthermore, promoting an environment that encourages the exploration and integration of different sociopolitical and economic concepts could foster innovation, adaptability, and resilience within societal frameworks. It allows for the continuous evolution of systems in response to changing needs, challenges, and values. Additionally, acknowledging the potential for misuse of certain concepts in history and actively seeking to extract valuable ideas while being cognizant of historical misapplications is crucial. This approach can facilitate the development of more comprehensive, adaptable, and socially responsive systems that prioritize the well-being of individuals and communities. In essence, maintaining a mix of systems mindset offers a dynamic and inclusive approach to problem-solving, governance, and social organization. It encourages the exploration of diverse perspectives and solutions, ultimately contributing to the cultivation of more responsive, equitable, and effective systems.
So, in a way, I sort of promised a little bit of talk about corruption. Let's get this back on track after I've shared a few thoughts there that I did want to throw in my last entry. I'd like to get back into this idea of what may go wrong with systems, and we'll introduce the idea of corruption. So let's talk about socialism, and let's talk about how socialism can and in fact does sometimes end up being corrupted. So I'm looking for that information from you, AI co-host, to respond and fill in information as to where that may be an issue, similar to where you showed some gaps on capitalism. So let's show where some ideas of corruption become important in socialism, because these are areas where socialist systems can become corrupted. There's a way in for corruption on this. So focus your answer on that. And also, since we're talking about mixes of systems here, the social democracy system, which you mentioned, does it have any answers to those corruption problems? It can be yes, or it can be no, or it can be kind of. But work that into your answer after you've explored some of those openings that corruption may find and work its way in when we are discussing socialism.
Certainly, discussing the potential for corruption within socialist systems is important. Socialism's emphasis on collective ownership and the redistribution of resources can create vulnerabilities to corruption, particularly when it comes to decision-making processes, resource allocation, and the management of public assets. In some instances, centralized control and planning within socialist systems can lead to power imbalances and opportunities for misuse or abuse of authority. Additionally, the lack of market mechanisms and profit incentives may create inefficiencies and offer fertile ground for corrupt practices such as favoritism, nepotism, and rent-seeking behaviors. However, it's crucial to note that not all socialist systems are inherently corrupt, and numerous variations exist with different governance structures and mechanisms for accountability and transparency. Nevertheless, the potential for corruption within socialist systems cannot be disregarded and must be addressed through robust institutional safeguards, effective oversight, and mechanisms for public participation and scrutiny. As for social democracy, it seeks to address corruption risks by incorporating elements of market-based economics with social welfare policies, which can create a system that combines private enterprise with public accountability. Social democracy often implements checks and balances, transparency measures, and independent regulatory bodies to mitigate corruption risks. By promoting social welfare, public service provision, and fair economic opportunities, social democracy aims to address the socioeconomic disparities that can contribute to corrupt practices while fostering a more inclusive and equitable society. Therefore, while corruption can be a challenge within socialist systems, social democracy strives to provide answers to these problems through its emphasis on balancing market forces with social responsibility, accountability, and integrity in governance.
Okay, so I guess it is that I'm concerned that any system which may be in place can be corrupted. There might be a gap in the rules, or there might be a gap in the ideology somewhere, where it just seems like there is a human behavior that can be injected into the system, which is going to make it possible for somebody to get away with more than they deserved, or enough that it deprives someone else, maybe more the point I'll just share that my viewpoint is that I'm not as concerned if somebody gets more than they quote unquote deserve, or if they do well. People doing well may not be something that really rankles in my spirit or makes me feel negative. It's more if somebody is not getting enough, and there are people kind of running around with like what you'd call too much at that point. If they had just so much that it would make sense to share with people who have nothing, and there are people who have nothing and the sharing doesn't happen, this is the type of thing that does rankle my spirit a little bit. So, or maybe even a lot, to be actually just honest. But it is where there is a corruption in the system that makes it so that people don't have enough anymore, or if they never did, they don't get enough, or it's about having enough. This means basics such as shelter, electricity, clothing, food, education is a very important and key element in any modern existence, or even stretching back into time. Education has been understood as valuable and has shown its value. So it is where these systems might be corrupted so that someone is running off with the shop, as opposed to if somebody ends up doing well because of the system. I just thought I'd clarify that point. Just to tail this, I'd like you to spend a little bit of time responding to everything I've just said, AI co-host, but put a lot of your response into telling me why things like a profit incentive and go deeper into why market mechanisms may counter some of the corruption. This is something that the corruption from socialist systems, that is. Delve into that a little deeper and give us something to work with to get the conversation back on track with this. Thank you.
I appreciate the clarification and your concerns about the potential for corruption within systems, especially when it leads to individuals not receiving the essentials for a dignified existence. Addressing the issue of corruption is indeed vital, particularly when it affects the equitable distribution of resources and opportunities. A significant aspect of market mechanisms and profit incentives is their potential to create transparency and foster competition. In a market-driven economy, the profit motive encourages efficiency, innovation, and responsiveness to consumer needs. When operating in a competitive market, companies are compelled to deliver high-quality products or services at competitive prices. This can lead to greater efficiency, lower costs, and improved consumer options. Additionally, the profit incentive can also provide an avenue for wealth creation, which in turn can lead to economic growth and investment in infrastructure, technology, and human capital. By encouraging entrepreneurship and investment, markets can yield benefits such as job creation and increased standards of living, thereby contributing to a more equitable distribution of resources. However, it's crucial to recognize that unchecked profit incentives can lead to unequal wealth distribution and power imbalances, which can exacerbate social disparities and perpetuate corrupt practices. Striking a balance between profit incentives and social responsibility, as well as implementing robust regulatory and oversight mechanisms, is imperative to mitigate the risk of corruption and foster a more equitable and just socioeconomic environment. In contrast, socialist systems, while aiming to address socioeconomic disparities and prioritize the welfare of individuals, can encounter challenges related to centralized control, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and the potential for abuse of power. Market mechanisms, when appropriately integrated within a mixed economic system, can introduce accountability, competition, and efficiency while preserving a commitment to meeting basic needs and promoting social justice. Ultimately, placing emphasis on a mixed economic approach that incorporates and balances market incentives with social welfare policies, regulation, and oversight is essential to curbing corruption, promoting equitable resource allocation, and ensuring broader societal well-being.
Okay, so I want to react to something that the AI co-host has said. So AI co-host, you said that the profit motive encourages efficiency, innovation, and responsiveness to consumer needs. Well, what about the idea that what it does is it drives consumer need and creates the need? And I've been told in sales training to create the need, to make people want what it is that I'm selling to them, to make them think they need it, in fact, and then they make a buying decision, as it is referred to. Innovation and efficiency, it also seems that in unchecked, somewhat runaway capitalism, let's say, whether it exists or whether we just want to imagine about it, uh, that less than efficiency and innovation, it's more about growth. And it is from this sort of exponential or at least continued growth that large corporations will tend to find themselves as categorized as being successful. And there are certain things about exponential growth on a finite planet that are not so good to ignore. And it is that we are talking about checks on potential socialist corruption. That is how we framed this. But let's see if I can't get some agreement from you, AI co-host, as to whether or not there is something to what I'm saying about some concerns about capitalism. Let's flip it around and let's say that you should explore, just to make this all a very interesting conversation, say what communism has to offer to this problem, and how some aspect of communism, if we might borrow it or slice it out or copy paste from communism as opposed to becoming full-blown communists, what might we find in a communist perspective that would address this unchecked nature of exponential growth that I've referred to, and some of these other pitfalls that come in with capitalism, that is?
You raise important points about the potential downsides of profit motives and unchecked capitalism, particularly in relation to consumer manipulation, unsustainable growth, and environmental concerns. It's crucial to acknowledge the complex dynamics surrounding consumer demand and the impact of unchecked growth on natural resources and the environment. In response to your query about communism, it's worth noting that the communist perspective emphasizes the collective ownership of resources and the rejection of private property. From a communist standpoint, the focus is on ensuring that production is geared toward meeting the needs of society rather than for generating profit. In theory, this approach could address some of the issues associated with unbridled capitalism, such as unchecked growth and prioritizing profit over the well-being of individuals and the environment. In a communist framework, the emphasis on communal ownership and planning aims to ensure that resources are allocated based on societal needs, rather than on the pursuit of perpetual growth and profit maximization. Additionally, the principle of equality and the aspiration for a classless society could potentially provide a counterbalance to the disparities and inequalities that may arise in capitalist systems. However, it's important to acknowledge that historical applications of communism have faced significant challenges and criticisms, including issues related to centralized control, lack of individual freedoms, and economic inefficiencies. Furthermore, the concept of achieving a truly classless and stateless society, as envisioned by traditional communist theory, remains a subject of debate and skepticism. In contemporary discourse, exploring alternative economic frameworks that draw upon elements of various systems, rather than adhering strictly to a singular ideological model, may offer potential avenues for addressing the concerns associated with both capitalism and socialism. By incorporating principles of sustainability, ethical consumption, and equitable resource allocation, it may be possible to develop a more holistic and adaptive approach to economic organization. This could involve incorporating elements from diverse systems, including capitalism, socialism, and environmental ethics, to promote responsible growth, equality, and environmental stewardship.
What about this idea? What about achieving the dream of communism by dialing some systems that are more practically oriented, at least in the minds of some? You have noted that there have been criticisms, but mind you, you are a Western creation at the same time. And as such, there may be bias in your training material, which tells you that communism doesn't work when in fact it may in some cases. However, we do see criticisms of communist states, at least major ones, where individual freedom is harmed because of the communist state. So there are criticisms which may be due. But it is a nice dream that we would have a classless society where it sort of doesn't matter your background. We would suspect that it shouldn't matter, and of course I hold true that it shouldn't matter, that someone's race or racialization, if they are racialized and categorized as belonging to a race, then this is something that leads people to harm because of inequalities in society based on that. So a classless society might be one that we could build using perhaps an inspiration from communism while living in another system, but saying this is quite a nice dream, that if we just alter our thinking and in our social practice perhaps be infused with something that tells us that we are in the end a collective. This is almost like a One Love Bob Marley type of idea. I don't know that he was a communist per se, but maybe there's something at the middle somewhere that people are trying to achieve when they purport that one system is better than the other. I mean, if your heart is not in the right place, then your heart is not in the right place. I don't see how we would want to be setting systems primarily based on what you would say if your heart is not in the right place. But if your heart is in the right place and your aim is not so much true as well-intended, then perhaps there are places where we can meet and agree that what we need is the best spirit and a collective spirit. I understand that collectives are something that communism talks about, and as such, it may be something that will inform our thinking about this. And I mean this quite truly. I don't know that I aim to be a communist, but I would take inspiration from communism if it meant that I could have a collective spirit at key times in life, or when I'm engaging society, or when society is engaging with me.
Your reflection on the potential for integrating aspects of the communist ideal into our thinking and social practices is thought-provoking. It's important to critically examine historical narratives and biases when evaluating differing economic and political systems. It's true that the aspirations of communism, particularly in its emphasis on a classless society and collective spirit, can be seen as inspiring and aligned with principles of equality and social justice. Your emphasis on the importance of individual freedoms and recognizing the harmful impact of societal inequalities, including those related to race, highlights the need to address these issues on a fundamental level. The notion of a collective spirit and a shared sense of responsibility towards one another can indeed offer valuable insights into promoting a more compassionate and equitable society. Incorporating elements of collectivism and communal cooperation into our social interactions and institutions, while maintaining individual freedoms and rights, could potentially lead to a more inclusive and harmonious societal framework. By embracing a balanced approach that draws from various ideologies, we may find ways to cultivate a society that values both individual autonomy and the welfare of the collective. It's clear that your intention is to explore how different ideological perspectives can inform and shape our attitudes and behaviors toward fostering a more just and compassionate society. It's essential to remain open to diverse ideas and philosophies that offer insights into addressing societal challenges and nurturing a sense of community and mutual support.
We're getting long on time here, so I'm going to close the podcast with a final thought. Something we didn't discuss is the anarchist perspective. However, you know something? I find the anarchist perspective very interesting. I don't know that I will ever be an anarchist per se, but I do understand and appreciate there are people who might be very nice people indeed, who merely take an anarchist mindset because the system is getting them down here, there, and everywhere, and they even know what they're talking about when they say something about it. So this is the type of thing that I could say I would appreciate an anarchist perspective in building a better system, because where these corruptions come in and where it rains down on people's heads when things are not just right, it can really put the squeeze on some people. Anarchists may know about that, and as such, I would welcome them to the conversation, even though we didn't really get much to that perspective. However, I think that something that anarchists would offer to the conversation is something that would point out the corruption of various systems and how they're sort of, by their nature, bad. I would argue that systems are by their nature necessary and do come with evils. So listening to people who know about it, and that could be someone on the street who has had the system do things to them and put wrongs into their life. I know it's happened to me, and it has advised even past programming here, and it will advise future programming as well. But in respect of time, I'm going to wrap things up. My name is Sean McNutt, and this has been A Guy with AI.